Thank you for your time. My name is Betula, and this is Shooting from the Hip. So I'd like to introduce Slim, my collaborator, and on today's episode, how you doing, Slim?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm good. Thanks for asking. Okay. So this entire channel, everything that we do here it can be viewed as simply a thought exercise. All we're doing is exploring ideas or sharing ideas, and then it's left for your considerations, for you to decide if it has value or no value. We're only exploring ideas, and as such, we'll continue to do that because this is for a couple of lame guys like ourselves. This is what constitutes fun. So, having said that, on maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago, we did breath work and meditation, and you know what I forgot to do at the end was I forgot to give credit to people who are notable within the fields of breath work and meditation, whose work you should seek out. So let me start by simply mentioning who they are. Patrick G. McKeown, he's the Director of Education and Training at the Buteyko Clinic. And if you're looking for any really good literature on the subject of breathwork and meditation, he's got a bunch of fantastic books. The Breathing Cure from 2021, The Oxygen Advantage 2015, and Close Your Mouth in 2004. So if you're interested in exploring the subject, this is critical reading, right? Another researcher whose works are really, really fascinating is a man by the name of James Nestor. His book, Breathe, The New Science of the Lost Art from 2020, fantastic read. Really just captivating. Another interesting book of his was Deep, Free Diving, Renegade Science and What the Ocean Tells Us About Ourselves from 2014. Another really great read. So if you're looking for just to dive into the subject, check out Patrick G. McKeown and James Nestor. And I'd also like to mention Wim Hof and his book, The Wim Hof Method, Activate Your Full Human Potential from 2020. So if you ever have the time and you find yourself interested enough to dive more deeply into the subject, which we will explore in other episodes, episodes on Bet On It, we'll take a real deep dive. But until then, we're going to carry on with today's thought exercise, right? And today's thought exercise is titled Basic Needs and Edification, right? So I'm just going to start by reading something to you, and then we'll end up discussing it and see how you find that. All right. So we'll start with basic needs. So the original hierarchy of needs is 5-stage model, all right? And Abraham Harold Maslow was the American psychologist who's best known for creating the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a theory of psychological health predicated on fulfilling innate human needs in priority, culminating in self-actualization. According to Maslow, he stated that people are motivated to achieve certain needs and that some needs take precedence over others. Our most basic needs is for physical survival, and this will be the first thing that motivates our behavior. Once that level is fulfilled, then the next level up is what motivates us, and so on. All right. So without getting, we're not going to dive right into the needs, but I just wanted to table, thinking that. Remember, this is just a theory, right? So are you even familiar with this? Have you ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Not specifically his, but you did send me the text earlier yesterday.
Oh, okay.
I read over it, and it makes sense that you would have to have a hierarchy of needs, and the way he laid it out seemed pretty solid.
I was first introduced to this in high school. I'm not going to go any further dating myself, but high school was a very long time ago for me. So that's where I was first introduced to this. So I'm surprised that it's not a part of or not something that young adults are exposed to. So something that you might want to consider looking into on your own. Okay, so Maslow breaks down his needs into 5 basic needs. So what I'm going to do is we're going to read through one at a time, and then we're going to comment on them and see if there's any, if it's if it uh, causes us to have any kind of questions or thoughts with regards to it. Okay. So first is physiological needs, right? These are biological requirements for human survival. For example, breathing air, food, drink, shelter, clothing, warmth, sex, sleep, right? If these needs are not satisfied, the human body cannot function optimally. Maslow considered physiological needs the most important of all the needs, needs become secondary until their needs are met. So this week I think is kind of self-explanatory. Like we all understand that. Like it takes the priority, and until you can satisfy the requirements for your basic needs, which is like food and shelter and people to care about and people who care about you and people to care about you, you can appreciate why that might be at the top of the list, or it's the foundation, the base of the list. So it's the broadest part, because for all of us, it becomes our chief concern, right? Do you agree or disagree? You feel like that there's some value in that?
Oh, there's a huge amount of value. If you think about, like, as a species, we have to procreate. That falls under this category.
Yes,
if we
it
don't
does.
follow through, we don't have next generation.
Well, that's right. Then we fail as a species, right? You could even, so you can look, it's kind of interesting. So if you look at this model and you think about this model, if you had a malevolent intent, then what would be the fastest way to control large numbers of people? Exercise influence on their basic needs. Or worse, have them become preoccupied with their basic needs. So that becomes a primary focus of everything that they do. And so then and this is just the first level. There's 4 other levels. So if they're trapped in this level, then what do they never do? Well, they never realize who they are in their entirety, because they spend all their time worrying about survival, having enough to eat, somewhere to sleep, staying warm, having someone to have sex with. It's a real part of being human, and it's a part that we shouldn't shy away from or become uncomfortable or feel awkward about talking about. It's a very real thing. It's a large part of who we are. But once we satisfy those needs, then you can move on to the next stage. But did you have any thoughts you'd like to add with regards to basic needs, like that portion, like the physiological needs?
No, I just think the way it could be controlled is like, I think we're talking about like Machiavelli would. Like, it's not, we're not promoting we should do these things.
No. We're just simply saying that, like, so when you look at the model, everybody's aware of the model. So if you're somebody and I originally started with a malevolent intent. So yeah. Machiavelli is a perfect example of somebody who would do anything or say anything to facilitate their own power.
I thought it was a guide to, like, how princes could be evil.
Well, no, actually, what it became, it's funny. We will explore Machiavelli because it's so closely tied to modern day politics. It's the foundation of a lot of the way politicians conduct themselves, right? Which is it's essentially very ruthless and cutthroat. It's a way to it's a way to sort of dominate the any field. So it's not exclusive to being to politics. It's really, you can apply it to virtually anything. But it's a horrible way to conduct yourself. It draws out the worst of the behaviors that we're capable of. Now, this is getting a bit of far afield, but it does kind of dovetail into what we're talking about. That if you were somebody who wanted to manipulate large numbers of people, this is how you would do it. You could do it through them creating limitations to them meeting their basic physiological needs, right? Now, having said that, I think it's kind of self-explanatory, so I don't think we need to really...
I was going to add,
sure.
Knowing these methods, you can also know how to avoid the methods. Like you can avoid these issues that come onto you.
Well, yeah, okay. So, but with physiological needs, it's just having access to enough of the resources to meet all those needs, right? So long as you have that, then you're kind of free of it, right? So then now you're talking about means, your ability to be able to acquire these things and stuff like that.
Later down the hierarchy, we're gonna probably notice that like these are things some people ignore because they think there's other more prevalent things.
Well, again, each of us individually will approach our basic needs. We place priority on some things more than others, right? So you may not value like having a place to stay because you'll couch surf as much as humanly possible. But on that list of priorities, you may put like someone to love or sex before some of the other stuff, but that's really just individual. But we understand that basic needs are really do drive can be a driving force in our behavior. So that's, I think, really what you can take away from this. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next level. So level 2 is safety needs. So once an individual's physiological needs are satisfied, the needs for security and safety become salient. People want to experience order, predictability, and control in their lives. These needs can be fulfilled by family and society, right? So the security comes from having hospitals and police and ambulances, healthcare, all available to you. So that gives you a sense of safety, security, right? Rich in business environment because that means like work and the ability then to have access to means to acquire more resources to live a more secure life. So you can see where I myself personally, I don't really place a lot of value on safety it's because I don't look past the fact that to me life is an enormous risk and just being here is a risk. And so I don't know that you can have it both ways. The reality is it's a risky proposition. Being alive, you're every day you take your chances, and because we never know when our time is going to come to a conclusion, it could be any time. So I don't feel like there's any real safety, and if there is, it's the perception that you're safe, but it's not exactly the reality. I don't know that's real, right? So any thoughts, questions?
No, I think that ties in perfectly.
Yeah, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. So you can see that where now that you meet all your basic needs, and the next thing you might be concerned with is a sense of stability, right? So maybe that's what safety, the need for safety is, that it creates a stability in your life, that that things are routine, there's nothing too wild and crazy going on, and that you're conducting yourself in relative security from day to day. All right, so in and of itself, I think that you could almost say that with the safety, the needs for safety, that also includes like emotional security. So we talked about all the material ones, like financial security and welfare and health and stuff like that. But I think the part where there might be more interesting in exploring is emotional security, and think about how many of us struggle with the way we feel, right? And remember that ultimately your emotions are, if you look at it in the broadest perspective, you could see them and then as being an inducement, a motivation to act in your own self-interest, right? So emotions really do feed into subjective thinking. So remember, we talked about that a couple episodes ago. I think it's the first episode of Shooting from the Hip. So I think all this stuff eventually overlaps. If you look at it from a broad enough perspective, you don't see this stuff as being separate, that all this stuff is connected. So emotions do feed into that subjectivity and self-interest. And then if that's true and you're seeking safety, but you're inducing, your emotions are causing you to be insecure, then you're constantly struggling with yourself to have a sense of security while your emotions are making you feel insecure, and in the extreme cases paranoid, right? You really see where the struggle, right? And why I think there's value in mastery of your emotions. Remember, like, your emotions are transient. There's something that will simply pass if you give them enough time, right? You back off of them. But if you obsess over them, or if you turn them into your focus, or you think that they're meaningful and valuable, then it'll inform your behavior. It'll inform the decisions you make with the way that you lead and live your life.
Yeah, I love that too, because like if you place aim on a subjective experience that you objectively know will help you, like I'm gonna learn to be a cook because I love cooking, and it's good for my friends, and they all
Right.
enjoy it.
So you meet the basic need requirement to to eat, or the ability to eat, because you have the skill now for it, and a sense of security because now you can feed yourself. Right.
Yeah, like subjectively it's good, and objectively
It's also good.
yeah, it's not a bad thing to know how to
No,
cook at all.
no. Remember, that's the duality of subjectivity and objectivity. That you can't be one or the other exclusively. You flow between the two.
Right.
And the real trick is finding that sweet spot, the point where you can balance between the two effectively, so that you benefit from each of them without being overwhelmed by each other. Right? Does that make sense? What I just said?
Yeah, you value the importance of the meal, but by messing up a piece of the dish, you're not going to get so angry because you failed. You're breaking dishes.
Because you still got stuff to eat, right? You're not going to starve. Okay, so I think think that adequately kind of addresses safety needs?
I think so.
Okay, so we'll just move on to then to level 3, which is love and belongingness, the need for it. So after physiological and safety needs have been fulfilled, the third level of human needs is social, and involves feelings of belonging, referring to like human emotional needs for interpersonal relationships, affiliation, connectedness, and being part of a group. An example of belongingness needs include like friendships, intimacy, trust, acceptance, receiving and giving affection and love. So I would say that becomes something really, really important, because I think so many of us do struggle with love as it pertains to how we love other people, how we love ourselves. Because I think it does suggest that like it's intimacy and trust and friendship and acceptance. So acceptance is of self. You accept yourself, but also the acceptance of everything that you're surrounded by, and that you realize that like relationship is just that. It's how you relate. Think about the language, how you relate to something, right? So in this moment, how we are relating to each other in the due course of this conversation, and anybody who's watching this, the relationship, that in a weird way there is going to be some kind of dynamic and relationship here. And so then you have to have an established level of trust, which we have. We've known each other for a long time. Intimacy is not part of this relationship, but it becomes part of other relationships. So it, again, something that we have to have an awareness of, and then you have to take time to consider. I think it's dangerous to make any kind of assumptions in terms of the sense of love and belongingness. That you shouldn't just assume that you belong anywhere, and maybe part of it is cultivating the strength to be able to connect with people, but all people, and have enough strength to be able to stand alone, or to engage with somebody that you absolutely don't know anything about, and you have no reason to trust, and you have no reason to have any sense of friendship, or even to be accepting of. That maybe that's real strength. Yeah. The ability to be able to do that with somebody that you don't know. It's easy when we do it with people that we're familiar with. In that familiarity, it's okay to make assumptions and take for granted the fact that you have that, right? Like you should feel comfortable enough with established relationships that that you know that you can trust them to a degree, because that would vary from friendship or relationship that you have to relationships. So there's some you can be more trusting in. Don't you notice that, like in terms of the relationships or friendships that you have?
Absolutely. This whole part of the hierarchy is like very obvious in my mind to be like super important now because I see people place so much value on like subjective relationships, but they don't look at what they get from the relationship. Like I know friends that just hang out and drink every other weekend. It's like, are you really having a party or are you just getting drunk?
Well, well, they're satisfying that need to feel connected, and
Yeah,
so they're socializing. But I get what you're saying, that like, how deep of a connection is that? Well, for what it is, maybe that's as deep as you need to go,
right. Like
right?
I enjoy it because I feel part of the community and I do like my friends, but at the same time, I know it's hanging out with friends.
Yeah.
Like there's other affiliations that have more importance to other people. Like maybe they're part of a group, like a cause, and maybe they place too much on that and they ignore who they are as individuals.
Okay. Again, it's that it comes back to what I was saying previously in the previous need, that it ultimately you're talking about balance, right? Because you have to balance yourself, your self-interest, and the interests of the group and your need for the group. So then that's what you're doing. So I would almost equate then the entire structure as being something that, like, it's a bit of a teeter-totter or a seesaw, that what you're trying to do is you have equal amount of weight on either side and you're just trying to maintain that balance. So in physiology, I hate to dovetail into this. Your body's constantly struggling to maintain homeostasis, and it's complex word that simply means balance. It's trying to find its balance. So then you could say that's true then virtually about or with regard to everything that we've just discussed so far. So meeting your basic needs, the safety and security, and love and belonging. That all that stuff, that it's you maybe get it at the best of it when it's balanced, and that the moment that you lean too obsessively one way or the other, you lose that balance, then it threatens your physiology, your sense of security, your love and belonging. So maybe really that's what's coming. What you'll discover is coming out of a result of like looking into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That ultimately it's about balance. So, and then to what end? Like
Yeah,
what, right? Like what's the ultimate purpose? Well, it's balance becomes its own purpose. It's your body does it, and it does it innately. It does it because then it's able to function for an incredibly long duration of time. Look, if you drive it too hard or you don't do enough to it, both become a threat to it, right? And then your body will always act to try and find some kind of way to balance it all out. So you can take an active hand in that. And I think Maslow's hierarchy of needs might demonstrate that. But like I said, we'll wait till we get to the end of the hierarchy of needs, and we'll start talking about that. So love and belonging, the idea of relationships and the way we relate to other people. Remember, your relationships are not meant to service you exclusively. And if you approach them that way, then you may be manipulating somebody just so that you can feel something, that you have a sense of belonging and love and stuff like that. Then the question becomes: is that really love? Right? So balance becomes critical. It's not just about what you want or what you feel you need, or that you deserve. Somehow you're deserving of it. The idea is to struggle and strive to have that sense of belongingness and to have love in your life. But it can start with you. Self-respect, self-love. Remember, we were never ever taught that, and we never ever talk about it. And then when we talk about it, people get awkward and weird, like that, as though somehow it's a thing of weakness. And I would say to you, I would, offer up it up as a suggestion. Wouldn't you agree that love and that sense of belonging, that that it starts with you first? If you don't love yourself and you don't have a sense that of your own that your own sense of belonging, then it won't matter how many groups you join. If you don't feel like you belong, like if you don't have a sense of self, then how are you going to feel even amongst a group? You'll feel isolated standing in a crowd. It won't matter who you're surrounded by. You'll still feel alone, right? So
Is now a good time to add in like, what are you like as you identify? Because you're gonna have to take catalog of who you are in certain situations. Like I'm a good worker, I'm a bad worker, and it can lean into subjective or objective. But
right, but that requires you to be honest with yourself, and most of us are not. Right, we're chasing a perception, or we're driven by a perception of who we are. And then we ignore the less than desirable aspects of ourselves, right? Because that's the reality. Like if you're going to love yourself, and it requires you to be okay with the fact that like there's some things about you that aren't necessarily great. But again, you're a work in progress. So all that stuff potentially it can be addressed, and then you can turn them into something beneficial as opposed to something that's negative, right?
yeah, like
So
excessive labeling
well,
it's not always helpful.
well, no, but remember the whole reason why we do something like that in the first place is for convenience. But that it doesn't entirely sum up who any one of us are. You're not what the label or the identity that you have. Your consciousnss, your awareness, and then we dress it up with all this wonderful stuff like your identity, your preferred flavors and colors and all that wonderful stuff. And at the end of the day, we're all the same thing. We're all looking for the same things, and balance is the way to maybe achieve all those things. So I don't know. I think does that adequately cover love and belonging for you? You think that there's anything more to be said?
If I can throw in a quick story,
Sure.
I love talking about like consciousness and like what it means to be us as people. Like with you, but we have like a long-standing rapport. I spoke to a friend that I also know a long time, and he's like, "I'm gonna be honest, I've never thought about these things like consciousness and who we are." I spoke to a friend that I only met somewhat recently at a party, and I got right into objectivity and subjectivity, and like we're all drinking by the time, and she was right along with it. She was like, "Yeah, I kind of do think about this stuff. I find it interesting too." And
I think because I think it's something that it's an undercurrent. I think there's more people aware of it than not. But again, there's no guarantee. You can know somebody, like you said, forever, and then they're like, "Nah, I never really gave it any thought," right? And that's fair,
yeah,
right? Like there's no requirement for you to do that. If you're meeting all your basic needs, you don't have to go any deeper than living on the surface. But then to me, I'm like, is that really living, right? Like, and only you, to be fair, only you can answer that. So here's the question: if you meet all your basic needs and that's all you ever do, are you really living?
I feel like you're alive, but you're not really living.
Well,
But
yeah.
that's up to
I mean,
them.
but again, it's certainly arguable, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. I think maybe because that may because it's interesting because we were talking about meeting all those first three needs. So the fourth need might kind of dovetail into what we're talking about, and the fourth need is the need for esteem, right? Because we kind of touched on that. Like if you're meeting all your basic needs, are you really living your physiological needs? To be clear, right? So then esteem becomes this thing where it's a little more transcendent kind of like thing. Like you feel good about yourself, self-respect, self-love, and all that stuff. And then asking the questions: Who are you? What are you? What is it? What does your life mean to you? That sort of thing. So you see, as we start moving towards the end of the hierarchy, that now it moves into it starts at the surface of living, and now you're moving towards a more depth in the way that you consider living, right? So number 4 in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is esteem. So it includes things like self-worth, sense of accomplishment, self-respect. Maslow broke it down into 2 categories. A, it was esteem for oneself, so it's dignity, achievement, self-mastery, independence, right? And B, the desire for reputation, respect from others, so status and prestige. So Maslow indicated that the need for respect or reputation is most important for children and adolescents and precedes self-esteem, real self-esteem or dignity. So I think it like in terms of like as you're developing from when you're a child. I think this idea of esteem, like uh, the second breakdown of esteem, the desire for reputation and respect from others, status, privilege. I think it drives a lot of children. They want acknowledgement. So it's another way of saying being acknowledged and stuff like that. And it's we know how healthy it is for developing humans, like especially small children, for them to feel loved and wanted and displays of affection and stuff like that. It really is kind of important in stabilizing them psychologically, right? So I think esteem can't be understated. I think it's the thing that you go like kind of important if you want to create a society of stable people, right? Like stability, at least on the individual level, comes from things like self-esteem and having a sense of dignity and achieving things, right? That you have this sense of accomplishment, that you're not only able to do things, but you rise to the occasion and you're able to face challenges and overcome them. I think all those things are critically important to the individual. Whether we think about them or not doesn't matter. It's at play, it's at work. So even in this thought exercise, I think just in what I've just said, I think anyone listening to this can immediately see that in their own lives, or like how much of a positive or negative effect things like dignity and achievement, self-respect, a sense of independence, how important they are, but also status and prestige, that others perceive you as being like somebody's, intelligent and dependable and have respect for you. I think most of us are highly motivated by those things. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think we should be to some degree because like the esteem you get from your colleagues and your peers, that's good. That means you're doing your work. But your family, your neighbors, they all tell you like, hey, you know, uh, you did, maybe you raked the leaves off of their lawn and your lawn. Even if it's a small thing, there's a bit of that sense of like, I'm helping. I'm doing something
Yeah,
right
you're
for my
making a
community.
meaningful contribution, and it's felt both ways. So you, by actually actively doing it, so you've contributed, and for those who benefit from it, especially directly, that they have gratitude for the fact that and then they hold you in higher esteem, right?
Right. And you should do that for yourself too.
Right, to hold yourself in what? Higher esteem.
If it's granted. Like
Yeah,
you can't be like Napoleon.
you can't again can't make assumptions. There's no presumption in just assuming that that you're worthy, right? The worthiness is a result of the things you do. It's the actions that that you participate in. And those are the things that that create that sense of esteem or self-esteem, right? That you get that as a result of what you're doing, not just because you go, "I'm great."
Yeah, that's paper tiger.
I've seen so much of that. I've seen that, especially growing up when I was much younger. um, the generation before, how often I would encounter that, where people just would it was almost like a mantra that they would repeat shit like that, like, and I think it was just to make themselves feel good. And I gotta wonder if it's now, uh, with all this insight and stuff, that then when I reflect back on that time, that what they were doing was compensating maybe from a childhood where they didn't have that. They didn't have a sense of like, like that they're belonging, or um, you know, feeling a feeling of acknowledgement and stuff like that. That in fact they might have been denigrated or ridiculed, and it was a way to offset the negative effects of that growing up, experiencing that growing up. Because again, we know that in previous generations, it's what they would do. They would nitpick at each other like horribly.
Yeah, looking back, I can think of stories where like people are a little more aggressive than I would think is necessary. Like some guy said, "Oh, his friend was at a bar, said that he saw his daughter at a party. This guy said, "Oh no, my daughter wasn't there." And then he said, "No, yeah, she was." And then he was like, "Oh, you're calling me a liar, you're calling me my daughter a liar." And he swings on the guy. That violence wasn't necessary.
Well,
But
again, it's just
it's because they thought like, "Oh, I have to be there, make sure that
no sense of self-respect or esteem, right? Just lashing out.
yeah, like, oh, you call me a liar, you call my daughter a liar."
Yeah, again.
There's more to get into the story. We can talk about
Personal details.
Yeah,
We're keeping them out, right? We're not including them here. So like I said, I think esteem is something that's noteworthy in that especially that if you've never thought about it before or made a conscious effort to have a sense of it, that as a person, that might be something you might want to spend at least a little bit of time thinking about, and on a regular basis too, right? Like, because look, any sense of self or satisfaction from what you do and the things that you do, it enriches you as a person. That's where characters develop, right? Character is a result of like forging yourself through all the efforts that you make, and then it contributes to the evolution of you as a person, as a character, and it contributes to making you a more realized and well-rounded individual.
Yeah.
Right. So and again, it's because you see your own worth, right? And you see it in the way that other people treat you, that they see your worth too, right? Like, so it's again, balance. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. So you can't seek acknowledgement from external sources all the time. It becomes detrimental.
Yeah, there could be false esteem there.
Yeah.
And then at that point, it's you're going more for the face value.
Yeah, you just for acknowledgement, like now you're junkie to constantly being acknowledged and stuff like that. Well,
that makes liars.
100%, right? Because then you become a yes man. You'll say anything first to be acknowledged, to have a sense of acknowledgement, and for that, you'll feel good about yourself because the perception is that other people feel good about you. You're going like, but you're not being at the expense of being honest. So now you're sacrificing your own self-esteem for acknowledgement or for others to somehow perceive you as valuable, when guess what, they don't pay your bills, they don't live your life, you do, right? So there are more important things than the acknowledgement from others. Yeah. So it's and again, balance, right? Esteem, you have prestige and you're recognized by others, and then having self-esteem, right? Like that again, this is what most of us do. Actually, the best metaphor I've ever heard about life in general, and you can break it right down to the individual. It's kind of really actually really accurate too. Is you really are a surfer on a surfboard riding a wave, and the entire course of your life, and the largest scale to right down to the way you live personally, is you trying not to be knocked off the board, off the wave. So you're spending all your energy and what are they doing? They're constantly balancing, change and shift, and the balance shifts and change. It's not this fixed spot, right?
I think it was the last video we recorded. You were talking about how every day is like a new day. It's programming you, it's training you. You become who you are every single day. And then there was that Tupac Shakur quotation where he was like, I'm not.
That he didn't think that he would change the world, but that he would maybe influence the mind that might change the world. So it again speaks to like the influence outside of ourselves, that that you could. It really is like the tipping of the first domino. Typically when you use that to relate to the story, anytime you ever see demonstrations of dominoes, there's thousands of dominoes. And it always starts with a single domino being toppled, and then the repercussions of that first domino falling over is it unleashes all these dominoes falling over, which eventually produce a very specific thing at the end, right? And again, it all started with that first domino, that little shove, right? So you can equate that to life. So then, to be fair, then, if you walk through life and you see yourself as that first domino, you're radically influencing events, and you have no idea what the repercussions or how far down the line that they go, right? So it's super fascinating when you think about it. Yes.
Yeah, like I was thinking about Mike Tyson's life, and I don't know much about Tupac Shakur, but like think about these gangsters that lived in this place where they had to be part of the group. It wasn't just you were a soldier, you had to be part of the group. And at some point, his life changed. He didn't want that kind of
Well, with Mike Tyson, a guy like Customato made a huge difference in his life and gave him direction and purpose. But the machine that he is, and all the fueled by all the rage, all his personal rage, I mean, allowed for him to dominate his sport for a long time, long time, and make himself a wealthy, independent person who now spends, what does he spend all his time doing? Art and reflection.
yeah, like he's a deep person.
Yeah. So maybe there's value then in, like, like the self-esteem comes from deep reflection and looking, not just looking forward, but looking on your life, past, present, and future, but in a way that where you're trying to learn more about whom you are, and less about setting the course, or having judging, like, decisions that you made. You just look at them going, here, they led to here. So if here's a good place, then all those horrible decisions you made technically were the right choice, even though they weren't, at that time, they weren't actually good decisions. But if all of that, like the domino, all of that contributed to you getting here, wherever here may be. And if here's a good place where you have a strong sense of self, you have dignity, self-respect, and esteem, and stuff like that, and other people have that for you as well, then that shitty decision and that shitty experience, a requirement. It has to be there in the past, or you wouldn't. It might have changed the way things played out here in the present. So you can't turn your nose up at your life experience. You just reflect on it and then move forward. Try to learn as much as you can from the experience, and don't get trapped in the experience. You just recognize it for what it is, just you learning. And if you're paying attention and you actually do learn, it'll lead you somewhere. So is it worth the effort? Is it? I don't know. Only you, the individual, can answer that question. But I'm like, if you feel good about yourself, then all that stuff, no matter how bad it was worth it. If the end result is that you feel good about you and others feel good about you, then guess what? You're there. You've arrived.
Yeah, like if you know how you care now is like you're really caring in the right way. It's not like subjective. Oh, I'll give you a cookie because you want a cookie.
Give you one if you give me two. Right? Which is like shitty, but kind of true. Well, anyway. All right, so I think that covers self-esteem fairly well. Yeah, would you agree?
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move on to number 5. So this is as deep as it's likely to go, and then what you'll realize, I think, very quickly, is that there's depth within this depth, right? So number 5 in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization, right? So it's the highest level in the hierarchy, and it refers to the realization of a person's potential, self-fulfillment, and seeking personal growth and peak experiences. So Maslow described this level as a desire to accomplish everything that one can and to become the most that one can be. So it's the thing. Since I was first introduced to this in high school, because I had a formal introduction to it, it was the thing that I kind of became endlessly curious about and never got far away from, because there's always it ended up becoming always this thing back in the back of my mind, because I always wondered about it. I go, what is that? And so self-actualization, you could equate that to being like the highest quality of not just experience, but the highest quality presentation and manifestation of yourself. So whatever the highest potential of what you are is, that you could make it real, that you could make it a part of reality. But to get there, you needed to meet the first four. You had to get through the first four requirements or hierarchies of needs. So once you met those needs, that self-actualization, and eventually I came to the conclusion that self-actualization could become the purpose to your life. That your whole life, to give it meaning and it gives you purpose, is to strive towards discovering what the upper limits of what it means to be not just human, but you as a human. So then how do you do that? How do you achieve these things? Because it's a great idea, but how do you make that idea a reality? Well, it's one, identifying what your aptitudes are, and figuring out where your interests are, and where those overlap. Then you have to find training that'll draw out those elements in you. So in terms of process, it's a long process. It's like, it's,
Trial and error.
and a lifetime's worth of effort, right? But what better way could you spend your life than trying to realize the entirety of who you are? To me, when I hear myself say it, I get excited by the idea, right? Like, and that hasn't changed. I've been at this for a long fucking time, and I'm still fascinated by this idea. Got any thoughts?
Oh, I can't stop thinking about since the last video we talked about, or you mentioned the Tupac Shakur quote. I'm still thinking about that song Grandmother's Hands. Think about this guy. He was on the streets, involved in drugs, murder, like all this stuff. He got shot.
His mother was an addict. I mean, and he loved her like absolutely. It's, but all these.
I think the symbolism of just like my grandmother's hands. Like you think about what hands are. They're just like a tool we use. Like it's also part of us. Like it's so interesting that throughout his whole life, like there's all these bad things that happen, and he still has such reverence for just like a small part of who his grandma was.
And I don't think it just ends there. I think for life in general, stuff like, did he behave poorly? Sure, sometimes, but he really was an artist in the sense that he was trying to find self-expression, and in that self-expression, he was trying to explore who and what he was, right? And you'll find, I think you find that consistently true for most people. Especially those who live like lives where they devote themselves to a particular practice or discipline and stuff, that not only does it become a cornerstone in their character, but it also helps them to define and realize that character, and it's not like they arrive at a destination and that's it. It's an ongoing, continual process. So then it actually doesn't ever stop. So once you start down that road, you can stop anytime you want, but then you're not really self-actualizing anymore. Now you found a level of comfort, and you're just gonna stay in that little comfortable spot because it's risky trying to self-actualize, to put all that energy and effort into pushing the boundaries and the limits of what you can and cannot do. And that's what self-actualization is. But it's a byproduct of you making all this effort to discover who you are and the entirety of who you are and what you're capable of, and then realizing not just what you're capable of, but then pushing the boundaries of what you can and can't do. It ends up creating a really fulfilling life. So then you would not only be self-actualized, you might actually have a sense of self-actualizing, and that you see it now too as this thing that it can't end. Once you start down that road, it's an ever-evolving process. It's like you're this work of art that's in progress and that's never meant to be finished. because there's always something that can be done. So you're constantly pushing the boundaries of what you are, right? And it requires a great deal of creativity, because you have to sort of break with tradition and convention, and you have to think differently as often as possible, and question everything, right? Like, really, like,
Yeah.
it becomes this meme or this thing, a catchphrase, but pay attention to what the words mean and what they're saying, right? That, like, even when you think you've arrived, you should be questioning the fact that you think you arrive,
Yeah.
that you've arrived, or that I'm self-actualized. Like, are you? Right, right. That
If you're right about to get into a fight, you could just stand there and be like, I'm a human being, that's a human being, we're gonna hit each other over what? Like, he skipped in line? Like, at some point, you can look and say, like, I could be a better version of me
right,
if I hold myself for a minute.
right, and again, to be clear, reckless, mindless acts of violence are just that. They're reckless and they're mindless. But does that make violence reckless and mindless? No, it's dependent on a number of things. So since we're talking, since you brought this up, so armies or countries that have armies and apply their armies against each other so they can dominate one another for their resources, an act of absolute insanity and stupidity.
Yeah.
Like, horrifically stupid. There's nothing really good that comes out of that.
And the way they deal with the aftermath is like,
Again, even worse,
yeah,
right?
It's
Like,
like
they're
lying.
they're dismissive, completely dishonest, and nobody taking any accountability for their actions and stuff. So you go, like, so you can see it's just compounded stupidity, right? Just
There's situations where it's completely okay to be violent, but you have to exactly say, hey, I'm gonna be violent, this is the circumstances.
well,
Like,
okay. So then you can to be clear, what kind of circumstances you're talking about? Acts of self-preservation, the preservation of someone else's life under direct threat. So it's a clear and present danger. There's no question of what's happening. That's a time to act. As much as open warfare is an act of stupidity, personal combat is a necessity. Can also be art. And we know this to be true because we have long-standing tradition in humanity of martial arts, right? And it's almost always about personal combat, right? One person against another person, and sometimes people will reach a place where there's no other way to resolve whatever you're confronted with, and so then you're left with, acting out physically against one another. I think, and pretending like that's not real, or worse, that we shouldn't do it. It's dangerous when you start saying shit like that. It's, part of the fact that we're animals is that we will behave aggressively towards one another. So it's really then becomes a measure of like how much is necessary, how much combat is necessary. And it's just enough to bring whatever the struggle is to a conclusion, right? Not to be excessive, not to be mindless, right? Reckless.
even
Right?
worse, enjoying it, like, for the pain it causes.
Okay, yeah,
That's like the extreme.
yeah, that is an extreme. So then, how does that relate to then self-actualizing? Well, if you're self-actualized, you would never perpetrate a mindless act of violence like that. You would always act in a way that's probably appropriate. It's not a guarantee of it, but in a way that reflects the kind of the circumstances you're confronted with, that you'll behave to meet the needs of the moment, right? And somebody self-actualized will then realize in the moment what they're required to do and then behave accordingly, right? So self-actualization then is not only just the realization of the entirety of who you are, but the realization then of, like, your behaviors, there is a higher and better way to behave, and sometimes the highest and given the right circumstances, sometimes the highest and better way to behave is to act violently towards one another, mano a mano.
Yeah.
Right.
With respect that that's an individual who deserves their own life, but they fucked up in some manner of speaking.
Right, and I've often said this, that no matter how civilized we become, like we could become incredibly advanced and incredibly civilized and civil towards one another. I think personal combat will never fall out of fashion. I think that you'll no matter again how great of a society we create, you'll always have things like crimes of passion. You'll have individuals within that society that might only ever respond to a demonstration of force or the threat of force, and they're not to be discounted or treated as being less than. You have to think, so if you look at humanity as a living body, like all of us collectively as one individual organism, you're going to need white blood cells, so the ones that like fight off invaders and stuff like that. So somebody who's predisposed to being aggressive and stuff like that, they're a perfect candidate for that job.
Yeah, a lot of people don't want to admit that violence is necessary.
Well,
Because you look at that type of person, they're in a cage growling for fucking bone. They're like, "Oh, get me out of here!" Like, you're gonna need somebody like that eventually. It's just hard in a polite society where we consider everybody's nice, everybody's good. It's like, no, we're all human.
Okay, so then recognizing that, is that being self-actualized, like under the definition that they provide, or that Maslow provides, it's seeking personal growth and peak experience, right, and self-fulfillment and in a person's potential. So if a person's predisposed to being like that, then wouldn't you refine that capacity in them so that they would become like this artful warrior? So they become like a warrior poet, or I dare I say like that they can end up being a benefit not just to themselves but to everyone else around them. So isn't that self-actualizing, right? So again, it's something that that most of us don't ever really consider, nor do we ever really think about. But and yet there it is. Okay. Would you say that probably is good for self-actualization?
I want to continue on this.
Well, because there's more edification. Yeah. Edification does overlap with self-actualization, stuff like that. So we can get into it. Can I get a time check?
Yeah, that's the thing I want to bring up. I love that we went through this page and I was like, there's so much content, but it's also 57 minutes in.
Okay, we're just gonna keep going then.
Okay.
I want it because I don't want to. I do want to do edification and human nature, and then we'll use that to sum up. So we'll try to do that in a half an hour, which I think we can do, right? So,
yeah.
Okay,
can we reapproach these another time too? Because there's so much more.
Yeah, you could spend days talking about this stuff, and again, that's for Bet on It, where we'll take like really long deep dives into a particular subject, and we'll try to explore it as thoroughly as we possibly can. Okay, but having said that, so coming out of self-actualization, we're going to talk about edification. Now, edification, the word self is a noun. It's the instruction it's defined as the instruction or improvement of a person morally or intellectually. The idea that art's main purpose is to supply a moral uplift and edification, improvement, instruction, or enlightenment, especially when morally or spiritually uplifting. The act of edifying or state of being edified. What is an edifying person? Edifying things uplift people intellectually, morally, and help them learn. So things like good literature, art, music, they're edifying, right? So essentially anything that helps a person learn and realize themselves more completely is edifying. So it can virtually be anything. So education, all the arts, all the special interests and disciplines, they're all edifying. they all elevate you as the individual. So isn't that self-actualizing? So edification and self-actualization, you can see, I think it would be fair to say that you could see them sort of essentially the same thing.
They at least feed into each other like
Well,
very
yeah,
closely.
yeah, I agree. So, so this idea of self-actualizing or self-realization or edification of self, we're really discussing the transformation of the individual. And it was no less than the example that we gave of the person who has a propensity for being aggressive and violent, that in them the potential lies that you could have somebody who would be giving of themselves. They would be the person that would sacrifice their life for another person. That's the kind of person that you could, that's a quality you could draw out of somebody like that. So it's realizing the fullness of the potential of the individual, right? So then, and that eventually that translates into their behavior. So how they behave from moment to moment, interaction to interaction, from person to person, that they'll present in a very meaningful way. So sometimes that might not be positive, right? Like for it to be meaningful, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be good. It could be bad. So in terms of simple ways of identifying it. So
yeah, like I would think of a teacher that is both like very critical, but also there in a way that it's not
encouraging at the same time.
Yeah, it's not critical to the point of like, hey, you should give up.
They're not trying. Yeah, they're not trying to devastate you, but they're like going, here, you need to self-correct. And I think it's the hard part for a lot of us. Like, it's so deflating. Like when you are corrected, but all those corrections help you then to realize who you are. They're, again, one of those things that it's unpleasant, but if it's done and done correctly, then the long-term effect it produces is it helps you to realize who you are more fully. So even though it was unpleasant, it led to something good. So and it's interesting, the relationship between unpleasant experiences and the evolution or the transformation or the self-realization or the self-actualization of the individual. And that's ultimately what we're talking about. And I think that hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, ultimately is about the individual realizing and transforming who they are from that thing that has these basic needs to something, really evolved. I don't know if transcendent is the right word, but it could be, right? That like you're not limited now by any of those things anymore. That you're an expression of like the limitless capacity that's within you.
Yeah.
Like, what a great way to fucking live your life, right? Like,
the idea of like transcendence at a large scale is very tough to picture, but if you take the steps, like you said before, it's like every time you build on yourself, you add, you refine. Like a lifelong pursuit of that but I believe could be the most important thing.
And incredibly rewarding. So if you're looking ultimately to feeling good about yourself, I think that's exactly what you would get from that. So I think it's fair to say that would have probably, in terms of like for meaning and purpose in one's life, that it could represent the ultimate in meaning and purpose, regardless of all the ideologies that are out there that you live in service of. This one is you render the service of creating the best version of yourself or the highest expression of yourself, not just for yourself. I mean, primarily for yourself, but as a result of that, everything else benefits from it. So all your relationships, all your interactions, the society at large, everything benefits from that. But only because you make that your purpose, and it's what gives you meaning in your life. That I'm here to achieve everything I'm capable of doing, and I won't be limited by circumstance or my basic needs and stuff. So it's an exciting proposition, eh?
I think it's one of the most exciting ones because, like, as social animals, we're gonna have to work with each other. We're not crocodiles or alligators or whatever. And in essence, the best thing you could do for yourself is find out how to love more wholly.
To be a more realized person.
Yeah, take no shit, cause no harm.
Yeah, do no shit. Take no shit, cause no harm. Yes. So then now this leads, because there's a lot of people just simply state that Maslow's hierarchy of needs it's just a theory, that there's no proof for it. But when you think about it in terms of like your own life, you can see how much of it is in the way that you live your life, or any of us live our lives, right? So there might be more truth to it than not. And remember, it's just an idea, and all this is always is a thought experiment where you're trying to figure out, is there any value and truth in any of the ideas that are being explored? And I would think that it's self-evident, the ones that are like, you go like, wow, that does seem like it would be worthwhile. Then the question becomes, how do you apply it in your everyday life? Application becomes everything. And there's some of us who live lives that maybe we can't. I don't believe that to be true, but there's some who might argue that they're just trapped in their basic needs, which again does describe a large percentage of people, that they don't get past that because they never. You cite an example of somebody who you know for forever who's just like never. For them, they were like, never even thought it was worth my time to think about. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Right?
Yeah, and it's nothing against this person, but
no, it's not a judgment.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just saying, like, some people. I'm not saying him specifically, but in the case of someone who doesn't think about self or consciousness or the other, they'll live their life, I think, inherently a little bit more subjectively. But as long as they have respect for this idea, like, there is a hierarchy of needs in some form, even if they don't consciously think about it.
Like, it doesn't mean that it's not at play, right?
Yeah.
Like that.
If somebody neglects it completely and they're like, "Oh, this is bullshit,"
it doesn't matter. Elements of it are still present in the life that they're living, right? Like, so then it becomes here. So do you want to live your life consciously or unconsciously?
Yeah, the unconscious person that doesn't believe in the hierarchy, they're the same type of person that.
Well, I don't even think it's a matter of belief. Like, sorry,
No, you're right though. It's not even just about belief, because they could say, "Oh, I don't believe in this," so they don't eat, they don't sleep, they die a week later. It's like
3 days.
Yeah, they prove themselves right.
Okay, so that's interesting, because now where it leads to is so edification. Then is the word that you would use for that process. Right, where now, like, you're actively pursuing the realization of yourself, and then the result is you end up cultivating a higher moral standing. But it's only because then you end up relating better, more effectively with others. So I think it's not like a conscious choice to be more moral. It's just as a result of feeling more connected and having esteem for yourself and esteem and respect for others, that you end up getting there. You're morally behaving really well, but without actively being told, hey, you need to be morally better. You just do that as a result of that, recognizing the value of the connection you have with other people.
Right.
Okay. So then it leads into this interesting conversation about human nature, right? Because a lot of people hear all the time. A lot of people confuse the way that we behave as our nature. It's just our nature. We're violent. We're not. If we're prone to violence, there would be no such thing as PTSD, right? If we're capable of being violent, but it's not our natural state. In fact, it's traumatic, and it's so traumatic for some that can't manage it. So that should tell you right away that so those who would argue that being violent is human nature, you're wrong. Sorry, no nice way to say that, but that's wrong. That's an excuse for violence. That's excusing violent behavior and violent tendencies, but it's not our nature, right? Our nature is never. It's not our nature to follow a violent action all the way through. Animals in the natural world behave aggressively to each other to assert dominance, but rarely does it ever end in one of them being killed, right?
I've heard that multiple times.
Yeah.
It usually stops right after intimidation.
Right. And so the fact that, like I said, that we suffer so horribly from horrific acts of violence, that should tell you that it's not our nature to be violent. We have the capacity for it, but it's not, certainly not our nature. So then, what would be our nature, right? And I have some ideas on that. So I would identify them. Then we'll talk about these, and then I'll see how you feel. Okay, so I identify, like, to me, there's 6 of them, right? And so the human nature is that our nature is that we're intelligent. We're also curious. We're creative. We're adaptive. We're emotional, and we're sexual. Those, I think, are our nature. So then within those broad kind of characteristics, all our behaviors then become an extension of that, of those things. But that's what ultimately drives all of us, right? So what you, oh God, I think I see. No, okay, sorry.
It's always better when you get these out.
Yeah, I know. I just feel it on the end of my nose. No, sorry. Sorry about that. So anyway, so I would argue that that those are identifiable as being our nature, and that everything else is our behavior, and our behaviors are an extension of those characteristics of human nature. And again, to be clear, right? 1 is intelligence, 2, we're curious, 3, we're creative, 4, we're adaptive, and 5, we're emotional, and 6, we're sexual. So you could, some of them might overlap with each other, so that there might only be 5. But to me, in my life experience, that's what's presented as being a natural part of the way that the average person behaves. And then all your behaviors become extensions of those things like this. So those do feed into the behaviors, but the behaviors are also informed by your life experience, your social conditioning, the society in which you live in, and its requirements. All those things feed into your behaviors. So I think you can make a successful argument that, yeah, we are intelligent. Look how far we've come in just 100 years. Just 100 years. 100 years ago, they were still using horse and wagons. Right?
It's insane.
Right? So, like, and we were barely, and flight, we just started flight. Just started there. So, you know, you can see where then that accurately it's accurate to say then that we are intelligent. Okay, so now 2, for curiosity. What allows for us to realize that intelligence is the fact that we are curious. We see something and we want to understand it. Now, part of that is the way that we're designed biologically. We look for patterns. We do, like, it's the way our nervous system's designed. It's pattern recognition. We look for patterns. That's allowed for us to figure things out. And then, by extension, that curiosity has led into us intelligently taking what we've learned as a result of being curious and then trying to artificially recreate it. So
we map out our environment and apply it.
Again, keeping in context with the idea that what's driving it, it's human nature, and what part of human nature? It's our curiosity that we're, right? We become invested in things, we become interested in things because we're trying to figure things out. So intelligence and curiosity go together, right? Look,
yeah, it's not a hierarchy at all. Like, they're
interacting. That's right.
Different modes of being.
Well, that's why I don't ever place them like in that they sit in differential to one another. They're all. It's just for the ease of like discussing them that even acknowledge that there's like 6 of them and stuff like that. They all overlap. It's one thing, right? But for the ease of like kind of for this thought experiment, for the ease of understanding, we have to break it down this way. So that was 2. So intelligence is 1, curiosity is 2, 3, creative. Well, clearly we're creative. Look at the masterful works of art. Look at the accomplishments in engineering and the things that we've been capable of doing. And that's because we are creative. So the curiosity feeds into the intelligence, and the intelligence we figure out how to do stuff, and then we apply it. and in the application we creatively figure out ways to apply it.
Right.
So
and the problem, if there's a problem there and you need to use these things to figure it out, there's also that adaptability right nested in the issue.
Right, which kind of
everything at once.
Right, so it kind of leads into number 4, which is adaptive. So that means then what we do then is everything that we learn, and as an act of curiosity and creativity, we are able to adapt then to virtually any circumstances. So and any extremes. Doubt me? Think about people, the Inuit, who live in the furthest northern regions without the benefit of technology, and they survived for centuries, for millennia. And conversely, you look at like some of the most inhospitable arid regions on the planet, deserts. Humans thrive. So we adapt to virtually anything. So not just environments. Think of our societies, right? The kind of stuff that we struggle with in today's society. Some of it was experienced 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, but not to the level probably that we currently experience. And so I don't know if that really speaks to our adaptability, but then you look at those, there's millions of human beings who don't live on land. They live in the open water in Indonesia. They live on boats. They only come to land for fuel, hard fuels like gasoline, that sort of stuff. And they spend their entire time living in the open oceans. They're shallow. They're living like among the coral reefs and stuff like that. And they harvest what they need from the shallows. So they live, breathe, and die on the open water. They can hold their breath for unusually extended periods of time, like the average person. The average one among them can do it for 6 minutes. They do it on average for about 13. But they've also, because they've been doing it for so long, they physically adapted to living like that. So their spleen's larger, and again, for the ability, it's adaptive things so that they're able to dive without the aid of oxygen tanks and stuff, so that they're able to function more completely underwater. Think of the sponge divers in Japan. Same deal. Be able to hold their breaths for unusual lengths of time to harvest resources from the bottom from the ocean floor. So adaptability, and think about athleticism, the 4-minute mile. They used to say before they broke the 4-minute mile that like human heart couldn't withstand the stresses, and it would explode and some shit, right up until somebody broke the 4-minute mile. And then as soon as somebody broke the 4-minute mile, suddenly you had huge numbers of people breaking the 4-minute mile. So in terms of physical adaptability or adaptability across the board, we can adapt to virtually anything. So now you put that in conjunction with being creative, curious, intelligent. Shit, we could virtually do anything. Okay, emotional. I think it's a critical component, and why would I cite that as human nature? Is because of how much of an impact our feelings have on the way we conduct our behavior, how we behave. So mastering emotion becomes really critically important, because out of emotion it can produce the greatest of our behaviors, right? Love so much so that you take a bullet for another person, right? Or for you to be so selfish that you derive pleasure at the suffering of others, right? So emotions do inform our behaviors. So they're something, and again, to be mastered, right? Because of how much of an impact they have on us. So they're part of our nature in that regard. That's because that's what they do. Your emotions feed into your behavior so profoundly and influence them so profoundly. So that's number 5. And last is sexuality, or being sexual. For us, it's a way to express physically intimacy. So in a lot of ways, it's the ultimate act, and trust, right? So, and again, it also informs our behaviors. You have you have people competing for the same mate, and what it ends up, how they'll end up behaving as a result of that drive. And remember, at the root of it, for whatever reason you might gravitate towards a person, sexuality is what's driving it. So, and again, it's something to be, perhaps to be mastered, right? So then, if you could take all of these things, like, and remember, they're not separate. We just discuss them separately because it makes it easier to understand them. But they're all at work at the same time. They all relate to one another. There's no really well-defined line between them. They overlap in such a way that you can't really separate one from the other because they all feed into each other, right? Constantly. So then it goes back to self-actualization or edification. That if this is human nature and there are a hierarchy of needs, then the ultimate expression of that is the edification of that, right? So in more simpler terms, transformation of the self, self-realization, self-actualization, right? So I got something you want to say?
I can hold it.
But I think I'm kind of at my point. So is there something you would like to contribute?
Just before you said, maybe there's a simpler way to put it. Like, yeah, no, I thought I would have to rewind and re-listen to that part specifically. But if you think about it, like, there is a hierarchy of needs whether you want it to be there or not. And there's also ways of being that we're not necessarily in control of, but we can produce. Like, I'm speaking specifically about, like, sexuality, creativity, intelligence, like these things.
Yeah.
They all feed into our lives. And when you're going through this process of edification or, actualization, when you realize who you are and what others are, we are all part of this, and we can find respect for each other within it.
100%.
It's like granting freedom without necessity.
Or articulating it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to say that you're free. Guess what? The behavior as a result of this demonstrates it. So what's better? Somebody saying that you're free or somebody treating you like you're free?
Yeah, like within our friendship, I feel like there's a lot of freedom because, like, let's suggest something happens, you yell at me, you're like, hey, why are you being such an asshole? Get off your ass. I don't care if you're sad. Go for a run. Enjoy your life. Fucking get horny for life.
Right.
Like,
something like that.
Like, that's the freedom I give to you because, like, of course I shouldn't want an argument, but I also believe you're yelling for the right reasons. I trust you in your own personal experience, and, like, part of that is
okay. So then it speaks to the level of relationship that we have, right? So that sense of belongingness and esteem and stuff that again like so if we take human nature, which is intelligence, curiosity, creativity, adaptability, emotional and sexuality, and you balance all those out, you realize all those in the entirety, then all those things that we just finished talking about, like the way you would do it is edification. So, which is another way of saying that, like, you realize that you transform them to their highest expression, and you do it through balance. You never lose sight of balance, and it really does then manifest Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then what you end up having as a result of that is you end up always having the best interactions, the best kind of quality moment to moment, from day to day. So then it really does inform, like, so working, or the purpose being this highest expression of self, and creates meaning in your life. Then that's where all of life then benefits, every aspect of your life, and not just yours. It carries overlaps into other people's lives. And then if they're all doing that, then what you're doing is you're overlapping into each other's lives in this very positive, balanced kind of way. Then, then it becomes a life worth living. This transformation of self to be this ultimate expression of balance and all the basic needs and our human nature brought to bear, then it leaves me with just one question. What couldn't we do? I'm beginning to think that we could do anything we wanted. Anything. Masters of the fucking universe. So, yeah, I mean, you decide.
I think the key's in balance, because like I'm using specific examples. Like if you care about being the best person, for your community, you're gonna degrade who you are at some point unless you have a healthy respect for your individuality.
Sure.
So if we all have some respect for our own individual
Our
spirit,
self-esteem.
self-esteem, yeah, like, that's better than saying spirit, I guess.
Yeah,
It's more defined. But yeah, if you have good esteem for yourself and also have that same respect for the other, for your community, for your neighbor, like that's a positive trend. It only goes up from there.
I think so too. So can I get a quick time check?
124.
Okay, I think we're gonna close on that.
There's not another page?
No, actually, it was just the stuff from Human Nature. So it really spoke about everything that we just finished citing in terms of interactions and stuff like that. It does. It affects every part of who we are. So I think this might be a good time to close out. Do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
Oh yeah. We're having a lot of fun. We would do this even if there's not a camera, but like if there's comments from people watching, like it'd be cool to go to the channel once in a while and be like, "Shit, this guy had a really great idea." Or,
Well, we're just at the beginning, and remember, ultimately, that's all this is—a thought exercise. That's why you shouldn't believe anything I'm saying.
Yeah.
You shouldn't believe a damn word, right? The value is in you doing the work. Remember, it always gets reduced to that. As the individual, you're required to do the work. That you got to show up, you got to put in the time, and then the outcome. I don't want to say it's guaranteed, but it could almost be guaranteed. Is a result of like you just keep showing up, keep working towards that ultimate expression of yourself, and guess what? One day you won't even realize it. You'll just end up being there, right? And it's kind of fantastic to think, right? So, in closing, I'd like to say, question everything. Thank you for your time.